She was invisible. A nobody. A waitress who couldn't afford to fix the holes in her shoes. He owned half of Silicon Valley. Worth more money than most people could count. They should never have met. But when she broke every rule in the restaurant and did something that should have gotten her fired, she accidentally unlocked a mystery that had been buried for 60 years. And what came next changed both their lives forever. This is the story of how cornbread brought down an empire. Welcome to the story room. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you're watching from. You know what's strange? Sometimes the most important moments in your life happen when you're just trying to survive another day. Let me tell you about a girl named Sophie Chen, 23 years old, living in a cramped studio apartment in downtown Chicago with a leaky faucet and a refrigerator that hummed so loud she couldn't sleep at night. Sophie worked at the Sterling Room, one of those fancy restaurants where a single meal costs more than most people make in a week. The kind of place where you had to polish the silverware twice before setting the table. Where the chandelier alone probably cost more than her entire childhood home. Sophie wasn't supposed to be working there. She had dropped out of nursing school 2 years earlier when her father got sick. Cancer. The kind that eats through your savings faster than it eats through your body. He died owing $70,000 to hospitals, collection agencies, and people who smiled while they handed you bills you could never pay. Now her mother was sick too. Diabetes, complications, kidney failure. The bills were piling up again, like a wall she kept trying to climb, but kept getting higher. On this particular Tuesday evening, Sophie's feet were killing her. She had been on shift for 9 hours straight. Her shoes, cheap imitations of the required uniform, pinched her toes with every step. But she smiled. She always smiled. That's what invisible people do. They smile, and they stay quiet, and they hope nobody notices them enough to find a reason to let them go. The manager, a sharp-faced man named Richard who wore too much cologne and spoke with a fake French accent, gathered the staff near the kitchen. His eyes were cold as he looked them over. "Table 12 is arriving in 10 minutes, he announced. "Listen very carefully. You do not speak unless spoken to. You do not make eye contact. You pour, you serve, you disappear. Mr. William Grant is dining with us tonight, and if any of you embarrass this establishment, you will be unemployed before the dessert course. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, chef," they all murmured, even though Richard had never cooked a meal in his life. William Grant. Everyone knew that name. He owned half the tech companies in Silicon Valley. Started in manufacturing and transitioned to technology. Servers had been whispering about him all week. They said he was worth $40 billion. They said he started with nothing and built an empire. They said he was ruthless, cold, and hadn't smiled since his wife died 15 years ago. But it wasn't William Grant who made everyone nervous. It was his son, James. James Grant ran the family business now, and he had a reputation for being even colder than his father. He fired people for sport. He once made a janitor cry for leaving a fingerprint on a glass door. Richard pointed directly at Sophie. "You're on water service for table 12. Do not mess this up. One drop on that tablecloth and you're finished." Sophie nodded, her throat tight. She needed this job. She needed every dollar. Her mother's dialysis was twice a week now, and the insurance company kept finding reasons to deny the claims. When the door opened and William Grant's party entered, the entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. First came the security detail, 3 men in dark suits scanning the room like they expected an ambush. Then James Grant strode in, talking rapidly into his phone, his suit probably worth more than Sophie's car. And finally, William Grant himself. He was in a wheelchair, pushed by a stone-faced nurse. William was 82 years old, thin as a rail, wearing a suit that hung loose on his frame. But it was his eyes that caught Sophie's attention. They weren't the eyes of a powerful billionaire. They were the eyes of someone who was tired. So deeply, completely tired. He looked like her father had looked in those final weeks. Like a man who had everything except the one thing that mattered. Sophie grabbed the crystal water pitcher, her hands trembling slightly. She approached the table, staying invisible, staying silent. James was already in the middle of a tense conversation with his father. "Dad, We need a decision on the merger by Friday, James said, his voice tight with frustration. The board is losing patience. William didn't respond. He just stared at his empty plate. Are you even listening to me? James snapped. I'm listening, William said quietly. His voice was rough, like gravel grinding together. I just don't care. Sophie stepped forward to pour the water. The stream of liquid cascaded perfectly into the glass, not a single drop spilled. But as she poured, William's hand suddenly moved. He touched the rim of the glass, then pulled his fingers back as if the water had burned him. It's too cold, he whispered. James closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. Dad, it's water. Just drink it. It hurts my teeth. Everything hurts now. Nobody thinks. Nobody remembers. Richard was already rushing over, his face pale with panic. My deepest apologies, Mr. Grant. We'll bring room temperature water immediately. He grabbed Sophie's arm roughly. Move. Now. Sophie stumbled back, clutching the pitcher. She retreated to her station, but she couldn't stop watching them. The son who was desperate to hold onto an empire. The father who seemed to have already let go of everything. The chef sent out course after course. Dishes that looked like art on a plate. Seared scallops with microgreens. Duck breast with cherry reduction. Truffle risotto with gold flakes. William Grant didn't touch any of it. You have to eat something, James pleaded, his voice cracking now. The doctor said your weight is dangerously low. The food has no taste, William said, pushing the plate away. It's all the same. Pretty food for pretty people who've forgotten what real food is supposed to be. Sophie watched the old man pick at the corner of the tablecloth, unraveling a thread. He looked so small, so alone. And suddenly, she saw something that no one else in that restaurant seemed to see. William Grant wasn't being difficult. He was homesick. And that realization was about to change everything. Sophie recognized that look because she had seen it before. Her own father, in his final months, had stopped eating hospital food. He said it tasted like plastic, like sadness. The doctors called it depression, but Sophie knew better. He wasn't depressed. He was grieving for something he couldn't name. For home. For the past. For the taste of his mother's cooking on Sunday afternoons when life was simple and every meal was made with love instead of a recipe card. She watched William Grant sit there in his expensive restaurant, surrounded by his expensive son and his expensive security team, looking like the loneliest man in the world. And she made a decision that would probably cost her everything. Sophie walked back to the table. Richard was watching her from across the room, his eyes narrowing. James looked up, annoyed that she had returned without being summoned. But Sophie ignored both of them. She stepped closer to William Grant, breaking every rule of high-end service. She leaned down, bringing her face level with his, and she did something that servers at the Sterling Room absolutely never did. She spoke to him like he was human. "Excuse me, sir," Sophie said softly. Her voice was gentle, the way she used to speak to her father when he was confused and frightened. "May I ask you something?" William's head turned slowly. For the first time that evening, his eyes focused on something. On someone. He looked at Sophie like he was trying to figure out if she was real. "What is it?" he whispered. "Where did you grow up?" Sophie asked. James started to interrupt. What kind of question? But William raised one trembling hand, silencing his son. "Kentucky," William said. His voice changed slightly, softened. "Small town. Coal, mining country. Why do you ask?" Sophie smiled. Not her server smile. A real smile. "Because I think you're hungry for something this kitchen doesn't know how to make." Richard was speed-walking toward the table now, ready to fire her on the spot. But Sophie kept talking. "My father was from a small town too," she said. "Texas. When he got sick, he stopped eating. Everyone thought he was giving up, but I finally figured it out. He didn't want fancy food. He wanted his mama's cornbread. He wanted food that remembered where he came from." Something shifted in William's face. The mask cracked. Behind the billionaire, behind the empire builder, there was a boy from Kentucky who missed home. "I haven't had cornbread in 60 years, William whispered. His eyes were suddenly wet. My mother used to make it in a cast-iron skillet, crispy on the edges, soft in the middle. She'd serve it with butter and honey, and we'd eat it while it was still hot enough to burn your tongue. I can't make it exactly like your mama did, Sophie said. But I can make it the way mine did. With love. With memory. Would you let me try? James stood up, his face red with anger. This is completely inappropriate. Dad, this waitress is. Yes. William's voice was stronger now. Clearer. He looked directly at Sophie. Yes. Please. Richard arrived at the table, breathless and furious. Mr. Grant, I am so sorry for this interruption. This server is making me dinner, William finished. He pointed a shaking finger at Richard. Your chef makes art. This young woman is going to make food. There's a difference. Let her cook. The restaurant went silent. Every server, every diner, every person in that room was watching now. Richard's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Sir, we don't have. The chef doesn't prepare. I don't care what your chef does or doesn't prepare, William said, and suddenly there was steel in his voice. The voice of a man who had built empires. This young woman offered to make me something real. If you stop her, I will buy this restaurant tomorrow morning and turn it into a parking lot. Do we understand each other? Richard went pale. Yes, sir. Of course, sir. Sophie should have been terrified. Instead, she felt strangely calm. She looked at William Grant and saw her own father looking back at her. A man who just wanted to taste home one more time before it was too late. Give me 20 minutes, Sophie said. She turned and walked toward the kitchen, her heart pounding. Behind her, she heard William say quietly to his son, She's the first person in 5 years who's looked at me and seen a human being instead of a stock portfolio. In the kitchen, the chef was having a complete meltdown. You cannot cook in my kitchen. This is a 3 Michelin star establishment. We don't make cornbread. But Sophie was already grabbing ingredients. Not from the main prep station where they kept the fancy ingredients. From the staff pantry where they kept the simple things. Flour, cornmeal, buttermilk, eggs, butter. She found a cast iron skillet in the back storage, probably hadn't been used in years. She heated it up, melted butter in it, mixed the batter the way her mother had taught her. Nothing fancy. Nothing complicated. Just honest food made with honest hands. As the cornbread baked, the smell filled the kitchen. It was a smell that didn't belong in the Sterling room. It was too real, too humble, too human. But out in the dining room, William Grant sat in his wheelchair, breathing deeply. Because that smell carried him back 60 years. Back to a small house in Kentucky where his mother sang while she cooked and his father came home with coal dust on his face, and everything was simple and hard and real. When Sophie brought the cornbread out, still hot from the oven, still sizzling in the cast iron skillet, she placed it in front of William Grant with a small bowl of honey butter on the side. The old man reached out with shaking hands. He broke off a piece, the steam rising. He dipped it in the honey butter. He put it in his mouth, and he closed his eyes. A single tear rolled down his weathered cheek. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for reminding me what food is supposed to taste like. William Grant ate the entire skillet of cornbread. Every last crumb. He didn't use a fork or a knife. He just broke off pieces with his hands, dipped them in the honey butter, and ate like a man who had been starving for years. Because he had been. Not for calories. For memory. For connection. For something real in a world that had become completely artificial. James sat across from his father, watching in stunned silence. He had never seen his father cry. Not at his mother's funeral. Not when the company almost went bankrupt in 2008. Not ever. But here he was, crying over cornbread made by a waitress in a restaurant that charged $500 for a meal. When William finished, he wiped his mouth with the linen napkin, staining it with honey and butter. He didn't care. He looked at Sophie, and there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Life. Light. Hope. What's your name? He asked. Sophie. Sophie Chun. Sophie Chun. William nodded slowly. You gave me something tonight that I thought was lost forever. You gave me my mother's kitchen. You gave me home. He reached into his jacket pocket. How much do you need? Sophie blinked, confused. I'm sorry. You're working here, triple shift by the look of your shoes. Nobody works this hard unless they're running from something or running toward something. Which is it? Sophie felt her throat tighten. My mother. She's sick. Kidney failure. The bills are there too much. William nodded. He pulled out a small leather checkbook, the old-fashioned kind that nobody used anymore. He started writing, his hand shaking but determined. Dad, what are you doing? James asked, alarm in his voice. Something I should have done a long time ago. William tore the check out and held it towards Sophie. Take it. Pay your mother's bills. Get her the treatment she needs. Sophie took the check. She looked down at it. $200,000. The number blurred through her tears. It was more money than she had ever seen. More money than her parents had earned in their entire lives combined. It would pay for her mother's transplant. It would pay off the debts. It would give her mother a chance to live. I can't accept this, Sophie whispered, even as everything in her screamed to take it and run. Yes, you can, William said firmly. You gave me something priceless. Let me give you something in return. Before Sophie could respond, James stood up abruptly. His chair scraped against the floor. May I speak with you privately, Dad? Please? William sighed but nodded. James wheeled his father toward the private dining room at the back of the restaurant. Sophie stood there, holding the check, feeling like her entire world had just tilted sideways. Richard appeared at her elbow, his eyes wide. Do you have any idea what you've just done? Sophie shook her head, unable to speak. You just became either very rich or very unemployed, Richard said. My money's on unemployed. They'll realize you manipulated them, and then security will escort you out, and then I'll fire you, and then you'll be blacklisted from every decent restaurant in the city. But 20 minutes later, when James wheeled William back out, it was James who approached Sophie. His face was unreadable. My father wants to hire you, James said coldly. Full-time. As his personal companion. $200,000 a year, plus housing on the estate, plus full medical benefits for you and your mother. He wants you to cook for him. Talk to him. Remind him of whatever it is you reminded him of tonight. Sophie's head spun. What? Don't get excited, James said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. I know what you're doing. You found an old man who's vulnerable, and you played him. You manipulated his emotions, and now you think you've hit the lottery. That's not what happened, Sophie said, finding her voice. I was just trying to help. James pulled out his own checkbook. Here's what's going to happen instead. I'm going to write you a check for $50,000. Right now. Cash it tomorrow. Use it for your mother. And then you're going to disappear. You're never going to contact my father again. You're never going to mention this night to anyone. You take the money, you walk away, and everyone wins. He scribbled quickly and held out the check. $50,000. More than you'll make in 2 years of waiting tables. Take it and go. Sophie looked at the check in James's hand. Then she looked at the check in her own hand, the one William had written. $200,000 versus $50,000. A life-changing amount either way. But that wasn't what she was deciding. She looked past James to where William sat in his wheelchair. The old man was watching her with those tired, hopeful eyes. Eyes that had finally remembered what it felt like to be seen. To be human. James thought she was a con artist. He thought she had manipulated his father. He saw her the same way he probably saw everyone, as either an asset or a threat, something to be managed or eliminated. But William had seen her. Really seen her. The way she had seen him. Sophie made her decision. She took William's check, the one for $200,000. She held it up so James could see it clearly. And then, slowly and deliberately, she tore it in half. Then in quarters. She let the pieces flutter to the floor like snow. James's mouth fell open in shock. Your father doesn't need someone who wants his money, Sophie said quietly. He needs someone who wants to see him. I'll take the job. Not because of the salary. Because he deserves to be treated like a human being, not a bank account. She looked James directly in the eye. And you should be ashamed that a waitress had to teach you that. Then she turned and walked toward William Grant, leaving James standing there, stunned into silence, still holding his useless check. Before the story continues, subscribe. These stories are written to change lives. So, 3 weeks later, Sophie was living in a guest house on the Grant estate in Lake Forest, Illinois. The place was bigger than any building she had ever lived in. Stone walls, rolling lawns, and a view of the lake that looked like something from a movie. But she barely noticed the luxury. She was too busy fighting a war. James Grant had made good on his threat. He tried to break her. The staff were instructed to ignore her. Her room's heating mysteriously malfunctioned, leaving her shivering through October nights. Fancy nutritionists were sent to lecture her about how cornbread and home cooking were nutritionally irresponsible for a man with William's health conditions. But Sophie had grown up poor. She knew how to survive people who wanted her gone. She kept her head down, focused on William, and cooked him real food. Pot roast with carrots and potatoes. Chicken and dumplings. Meatloaf with mashed potatoes. Food that tasted like memory. Food that tasted like home. And William started to come alive again. He gained weight. He laughed. He started wheeling himself around the house instead of waiting for the nurse. He even began attending board meetings again, which terrified James because William had opinions, and those opinions contradicted the aggressive expansion plans James had been pursuing. The company, Grant Technologies, was in the middle of a massive merger deal. James wanted to sell off the original manufacturing division, the factory where William had started the business 60 years ago, and go all in on artificial intelligence and automation. William hated the idea. He said they were forgetting where they came from. James said they were evolving. The tension in the house was thick enough to cut. One evening, Sophie was in the kitchen of the main house, making chicken soup from scratch. William had requested it specifically, said his mother used to make it when he was sick as a child. As she chopped carrots, she heard raised voices from the study down the hall. "You're destroying everything I built," James was shouting.
No.
William's voice was calm but firm. "You're destroying it. I'm trying to save it. By holding onto a factory that hasn't been profitable in 10 years? By blocking a merger that would make us billions? Dad, you're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking clearer than I have in a decade, son. That's what scares you." The study door slammed open. James stormed past the kitchen, his face red with rage. He saw Sophie standing there and stopped. "This is your fault," he hissed at her. "You've gotten into his head. You've made him senile and nostalgic, and you're going to destroy this company." Before Sophie could respond, James was gone, the front door slamming behind him. William wheeled himself into the kitchen a moment later. He looked tired but not defeated. "Don't let him scare you, Sophie. He's afraid." "Afraid of what?" Sophie asked, stirring the soup. "Of being ordinary." William watched her cook for a moment. "Can I tell you something I've never told anyone? Not even my wife." Sophie nodded. William wheeled himself closer. "James thinks I started this company with a business loan from a bank. That's what I told everyone. It's what the biographies say. But it's a lie." Sophie stopped stirring. "In 1963, I was working in a factory in Gary, Indiana," William continued. "Miserable work. Dangerous. But I had an idea for a better circuit board, something that could handle more data. I knew it would work. I knew it would change everything. But I needed $500 to build the first prototype. In 1963, that was a fortune." William's voice grew softer. "I went to every bank. They all said no. Too risky. Too young. Too poor. I was ready to give up. And then I met a man named Thomas. Thomas Chun." Sophie froze. "Chun." "He worked at the same factory. Night shift. We'd eat lunch together sometimes, at shift change. He was saving money to bring his family over from Taiwan. His wife. His little girl. He kept his money in a coffee can hidden in his locker. I saw it once by accident. $540. Every penny he had in the world." William's eyes were distant now, lost in memory. "One day I was sitting on the factory steps, just crying. I was 24 years old, and my dreams were dead. Thomas came out and asked me what was wrong. I told him everything. about the circuit board, about the banks, about giving up. Sophie's heart was pounding now.
She knew what was coming.
Thomas went to his locker. He came back with the coffee can. He dumped all the money into my hands. $540. Every penny. I tried to say no, but he wouldn't take it back. He just said, "You have fire in your eyes. Fire is worth betting on. Make it work, then help me bring my family here." William's voice broke. I took that money. I built the prototype. It worked. Within 2 years, I had sold my first patent for $100,000. Within 5 years, I was a millionaire. Within 10 years, I was worth $50 million. And I went back to find Thomas, William said, tears rolling down his face now. But he was gone, transferred to a different factory. I hired detectives. They searched for years. But Chun is a common name, and he'd paid cash for everything. No paper trail. I lost him. Sophie's hands were shaking. Thomas Chun. From Taiwan. With a wife and a little girl. Yes, William whispered. I owe everything to that man. And I never got to pay him back. I never got to help him bring his family over. I built an empire on a debt I could never repay. Sophie sat down hard in one of the kitchen chairs. Mr. Grant. My father's name was David Chun. His father was named Thomas. Thomas Chun. He came from Taiwan in 1965 with his wife and daughter. My aunt. The room went completely silent except for the bubbling of the soup on the stove. William Grant stared at Sophie like he was seeing a ghost. What did you just say? My grandfather, Sophie whispered. His name was Thomas Chun. The boardroom on the 45th floor of Grant Technologies headquarters was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Chicago. A table made of polished black granite. Leather chairs that cost more than most people's cars. 15 board members sat around that table, looking uncomfortable. They had been summoned for an emergency meeting with no agenda provided. At the head of the table sat an empty chair, usually occupied by James Grant. Today, James sat at the far end of the table, his face pale. Next to the empty chair sat William Grant in his wheelchair, looking more alert and alive than he had in years. And next to William sat Sophie Chun, wearing a simple navy blue dress, looking terrified but determined. The board members whispered among themselves. What was a cook doing at a board meeting? William cleared his throat. The room fell silent immediately. Thank you all for coming on short notice, William said, his voice strong and clear. I've called you here because we need to discuss the future of this company. But first, we need to discuss its past. He gestured to Sophie. This is Sophie Chun. Many of you know her as my personal companion. What you don't know is that she is the granddaughter of the man who made this company possible. The man who gave me my start. The man whose name has been erased from our history. A board member named Patricia frowned. Mr. Grant, with all respect, what does this have to do with the Tanaka merger? The deadline is... The Tanaka merger is cancelled, Williams said flatly. The room erupted. Shouting. Protests. James half stood from his chair, then sat back down, his hands gripping the armrests. William raised his hand for silence. 60 years ago, I was nobody. A factory worker with an idea and no money. A man named Thomas Chun gave me everything he had. $540. His entire life savings. He asked for nothing in return except that I remember where I came from. William looked around the room at each face. I took that money. I built this company. I became rich beyond imagination. And then I spent 40 years trying to find Thomas to pay him back, and I failed. He died working in factories while I bought yachts. His son died drowning in medical debt while I collected art. And his granddaughter was serving water in a restaurant, invisible, while I sat in this tower playing king.
The room was dead silent now.
The debt is due, William said. With 60 years of compound interest, moral interest, and the interest of a conscience I've ignored for too long. He nodded to his lawyer, who began passing out legal documents to each board member. Effective immediately, William continued, I am transferring 51% of my voting shares into a trust. The Thomas Chun Legacy Trust. The trustees, with full voting authority, will be Sophie Chun and my longtime advisor, Patricia Morales. Patricia gasped. William, you can't be serious. I'm completely serious. Sophie owns this company now. She owns the factory in Gary that her grandfather helped me buy. She owns the patents he made possible. She owns the buildings, the technology, the legacy. It's her inheritance. The one her family should have received 60 years ago. James finally found his voice. Dad, this is insane. You're handing control of a $40 billion company to a waitress who made you cornbread? This will destroy everything. No, William said, turning to face his son. You've been destroying everything. I've been watching you, James. Watching you cut corners to boost profits. Watching you fire loyal workers to improve quarterly reports. Watching you sell off the factory where I started, where Thomas worked, where real things were made by real people. William's voice grew harder. You want to turn this company into nothing but algorithms and stock prices. You've forgotten that we make things. Real things. Circuit boards that go into hospitals and schools and homes. We don't just push money around. We build the infrastructure of people's lives. He looked back at the board. The merger with Tanaka is designed to eliminate 3,000 jobs in the manufacturing division. 3,000 families. James told me it was necessary for growth. But growth for who? For what? William pointed at Sophie. This young woman's grandfather gave me his future, so I could have mine. And what have I done with it? Built towers of glass, while forgetting the hands that made them possible. No more. Sophie will take over as co-chair of the board, William announced. James will remain as CEO, but he will answer to her. Every major decision will require her approval. And the first decision is this. We're keeping the Gary factory. We're investing in it. We're modernizing it. We're paying our workers a living wage. We're remembering that this company was built by people for people. James was shaking with rage. You're destroying my legacy. Everything I've worked for. Your legacy? William's voice was soft but devastating. Son, you don't have a legacy yet. You have a balance sheet. Legacy is what you leave behind in hearts, not bank accounts. Thomas Chun had a legacy. He bet on a stranger and changed the world. What have you done except protect money you didn't earn? The room was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning hum. William turned to Sophie. I can't give you back your grandfather. I can't give you back the years your family struggled while I lived in comfort. But I can make sure it means something. I can make sure his bet on me wasn't wasted. Sophie's eyes were full of tears. Mr. Grant, I don't know anything about running a company. You know the most important thing, William said gently. You know how to see people. Real people. Not assets. Not resources. People. That's what this company forgot. You're going to help us remember. He reached out and took her hand. Your grandfather saved my life with $500. You saved it with a skillet of cornbread. Same gift. Different form. You both saw someone who was invisible and made them human again. William looked around the boardroom one last time. This company will now be run with one simple rule. We treat people the way Thomas Chun treated me. With dignity. With trust. With the belief that everyone has fire inside them worth betting on. Meeting adjourned. 3 months later, Sophie stood in the factory in Gary, Indiana. It had been renovated. Cleaned. The workers had new equipment, better safety standards, and paychecks that let them sleep at night without terror. William was there too, sitting in his wheelchair, watching the production line. Watching circuit boards being assembled by human hands guided by human minds. Your grandfather stood right here, William told Sophie. Shift change. 1963, this floor. These walls. He reached into his pocket and pulled out that coffee can. Right here. This is where everything began. Sophie knelt down and touched the factory floor. Concrete that her grandfather's feet had touched 60 years ago. Thank you, Grandpa, she whispered. Your bet paid off. And it's still paying forward. William smiled. He knew. Men like your grandfather, men who've known real struggle, they know how to spot fire in someone's eyes. They know how to bet on dreams because they understand that dreams are all some people have. Sophie stood up, looking at the workers, the machines, the real tangible work happening here. So, what happens now?
Now.
William chuckled. Now you run a company. Now you prove that business can be profitable and humane. Now you show James and every other corporate robot that you can care about people and still succeed. Now you carry forward your grandfather's legacy. He reached out and squeezed her hand. And now I finally get to rest. Because the debt is paid. With 60 years of interest. In full. You know what I learned from Sophie's story? The most powerful thing you can do in this world isn't to build an empire. It's to see someone. Really see them. Not as a servant. Not as a transaction. Not as invisible. But as a human being with fire inside them. William Grant spent 60 years looking for Thomas Chin. But Thomas found him anyway, through his granddaughter, through a skillet of cornbread, through one moment of genuine human connection in a world that had forgotten what that meant. Sometimes the greatest fortunes aren't built on business plans. They're built on kindness. On the moment someone sees your fire and decides to bet on it. On the moment you see someone else's humanity and decide to honor it. That's the real wealth. That's the real legacy. That's the thing that changes the world. One simple act of seeing someone, really seeing them, can change everything. Thanks for your watching. Don't forget to share, like, and subscribe to the Story Room for meaningful stories that inspire and teach life lessons.